So Hold Your Breath is a film that I wasn't exactly super excited about, but I do love a good horror film, and since this was also starring one of the horror queens, Sarah Paulson, I was a little intrigued. Plus, that alone sort of gives it a high likelihood of succeeding because you already know her performance is going to be top tier, which it was, but unfortunately that still wasn't enough to save the film for me. But first, I would like to give you guys a brief recap of the events that went down in the film first, and then I'll explain to you guys what the big mistake was that could have definitely saved the film from being so convoluted and jumbled. I mean, in my personal opinion, I feel like there is just one decision they could have made at the end of the film that could have saved it from being not as bad. I mean, of course, there's many other changes the film would have needed to make it much better, but this one change would have rid the film of unnecessary ambiguity. So out in this desert area back in 1930s Oklahoma, a woman named Margaret lives with her husband and two daughters, Rose and Ollie. And the husband really isn't that important in this story because his only job is really just to not be in it, so they can make the situation that occurs significantly more threatening for our characters since there is no one around to protect them.
You could come with me.
I won't put them in a tent. Lose what little we have.
So he leaves for a job somewhere far away and he wants his wife and kids to join him. But Margaret wants to stay to hold down the only property they own, and also so she can stay close to their third daughter who died and is buried outside in the yard. But I think the thing that just makes the most sense here is that he's going somewhere hoping that this new job will work out, and she doesn't want to lose what they already have just in case it doesn't work out. So he leaves and tells them that once he settles down, he'll send some tickets so they can catch a train and then come stay with him. So during this time, Margaret is just trying to carry on with holding down the fort, hang with her friend Esther and the very few other desert country folks doing their needle stitching hobby, you know, just going about their day-to-day life. So some things you need to keep in mind about the movie before we get deep into it is that in this area where they live, there are these crazy dust storms that are so bad that you'll die if you get caught outside in it because you just won't be able to breathe, hence the title of the film.
Mama, were you outside all night?
And on top of that, Margaret has trouble sleeping and tends to sleepwalk, and because of this, she takes sleeping pills. And also, Margaret's kids like to read this short story called The Gray Man, about a supernatural being that can sneak into your house through cracks in a dust form to get in your head and can influence you to do bad things. So with all of that in mind, she eventually hears about a mysterious drifter who's allegedly been going around viciously murdering people. This is where we're eventually introduced to Wallace, who's a mysterious man that Margaret finds sleeping in her shed. He tells her that he's a friend of her husband's and that he told him that he could come stay there and help out. She also notices that the man is wearing her husband's jacket and he claims that her husband gave it to him. So Margaret feels like the man is lying and wants him to leave because she feels like her husband would have sent her a letter as a heads up about this guy. But the mail isn't running because of the dust storm, so she doesn't really have any way to really confirm whether or not if what this man is saying is true. So she finally gets him to turn around and sort of be on his way, but in this moment her daughter gets this like insane nosebleed. So Wallace tells Margaret that he can heal things with his hands and that he can heal her daughter, he just needs to be able to get close enough to touch her. And magically he does go over and touch her and he does stop her nosebleed. He also tells her afterwards that he can help their cow produce milk again so they'll have food, and he also proceeds to tell her that he can bring rain. And actually he proves that he is able to do all of these things, and he gets to stay and everything eventually becomes all fine and dandy for a little while. That's until Margaret and the family finally receives a letter from her husband. He tells her that someone at the train station killed someone and how his jacket and wallet was stolen along with one of his letters. He also tells her in the letter that he has sent for them. So immediately at this time, Margaret knows that Wallace is a bad guy and forces him to leave. But before he leaves, he starts telling her how he'll still be able to get back inside, and how locks and doors and twine can't keep him out, and how they're not going to stop the Gray Man, basically implying it as if he himself is the Gray Man. So Margaret slowly begins to believe that maybe it is the Gray Man causing all of these weird things to happen. Like she's still seeing Wallace although he's not there. She thinks she hears her daughter Rose crying for help one day when she's actually really laughing. She starts sleepwalking again really bad, and we can also tell that sleep deprivation is also playing a big role in what's been happening to her. So eventually around this time, she ends up killing her friend Esther after mistaking her to be the Gray Man one night. And after her neighbors begin to notice that she's kind of losing her mind, she also also starts to become afraid of the local sheriff taking her kids from her, since this previously happened to her friend Esther once she seemed unfit to take care of them. It's like she had previously been contaminated by the gray man, but this sort of moved over to Margaret. So the movie is convoluted, but I must admit that I am also giving a pretty rough recap. But hey, we're hitting all the main points here, so it's fine. So eventually Margaret's daughters slowly start to become afraid of her, and the sheriff decides he's going to come over to pay a little visit and check in on her and the kids. After he gets there, he sees that Margaret is pretty much out of her mind and how he should probably take the kids until her husband returns. So basically the same thing that's happening to Margaret happened to her friend Esther previously, and Esther warned Margaret that this would also eventually happen to her. So of course the thought of having her kids taken away from her because she's deemed unfit isn't going to make her happy. So after she gets pissed, she ends up killing the sheriff so he can't take the kids. But she also knows that once everyone finds out about this, that they're going to hang her. So her plan is to now overdose her remaining 2 daughters with sleeping pills so they can all die together and be with the dead daughter who's currently already buried outside. But the oldest, Rose, isn't having it, and she cooks up a plan to kill their mom before she kills them. So during a dust storm the same night she plans to kill her kids, Rose tells her that the youngest daughter just ran out into the storm. And this upsets Margaret because she wants them all to die together. So she grabs a safety rope from the porch that they normally use to safely make it back to the house in case of dust storms. And once she goes out, Rose cuts the rope and leaves her mom to die in the storm, which she didn't want to do, but she knew she had to do it because if she didn't, her mom would have killed her and her little sister. And then the film ends with both sisters leaving on a train to go live with their father. Now admittedly, the film did have some solid moments, and I know some people question if the film should even be labeled as a horror, but I definitely would classify this movie as a psychological horror, although the classification might be considered a spoiler itself. But the reason why I would classify it as a horror is mainly because there are many intriguing horror elements in the film. The gray man, the drifter, the unsettling body horror, and the mom Margaret herself are all horror elements, just to mention a few. But aside from the convoluted story and the rough, somewhat boring pacing, the biggest mistake that I found with Hold Your Breath is the unnecessary ambiguity with whether or not if Margaret was really going crazy or if the gray man really existed to some extent. Throughout the movie, we see dust particles at different points in time, and these dust particles are symbolic of ominous occurrences throughout the film. And most of all, they are symbolic of the gray man, based off the story that the 2 sisters read. Towards the end, the film begins to heavily lean into the direction that the mom has gone crazy and that the kids need to kill her to survive. If not, she's going to kill them. But the mistake is that implying at the very end that the daughter still sees the dust particles before cutting to black, implying that even though the mom is gone, they still aren't safe from presumably the gray man. Simply ending the film with their sleepwalking, sleep-deprived mom being the reason for all of these strange things, then her spiraling out of control and dying, and the girls being able to happily move on would have improved the film. But adding in the random ambiguity to have a more edgy, questionable ending was just a waste of time. So although I definitely wouldn't say that it's a terrible film, there's way too much going on for the film to be a great one in my opinion. So I'd personally give it a 5.5 out of 10 if I had to rate it. But if this sounds more like a winner to you, go check it out and let me know y'all's thoughts down below. But anyway, I'm out of here, and as always, thanks for watching.